This video is brought to you by Ground News. On Tuesday, South Korea held an early presidential election triggered by the impeachment and removal of Conservative former President Yoon Suk-yeol, who 6 months ago plunged the country into crisis with his short-lived imposition of martial law. Tuesday's election was won by left-wing opposition leader Lee Jae-myung, whose convincing victory over his right-wing opponent represents a considerable political shift for South Korea. So in this video, we're going to explain the South Korean presidential election, including its context and results, the domestic and foreign policy implications, and whether it finally means an end to the country's political turbulence and deep polarisation. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. The election was a two-horse race between Lee Jae-myung, leader of the opposition centre-left Democratic Party or DPK, and Kim Moon-soo, a staunch conservative from the People Power Party or PPP, who served as Labour Minister under Yoon Suk-yeol. There were some third-party candidates too, most notably the Reform Party's Lee Jun-suk, who founded the party last year after splitting from the PPP. As the polls anticipated, the DPK's Lee won a resounding victory with more than 49% of the vote, defeating his Conservative opponent Kim Moon-soo, who received just over 41%. And in a very distant third place was Lee Jun-suk, on more than 8%. The preliminary voter turnout of 79.4% is the highest in 28 years, highlighting the importance the public placed on the election. So, who is now President Lee Jae-myung? Well, we'll come on to policy details later, but 61-year-old Lee has had a life and career full of ups and downs. His genuine rags-to-riches story has seen him work his way from poor child labourer to human rights lawyer to governor of South Korea's most populous province. Lee very nearly won the last election in 2022, but was defeated by Yoon Suk-yeol in what was the closest presidential election in South Korean history. Lee is a populist and has been described in the press with terms like bullish, pugnacious, and unconventional. Perhaps unsurprisingly then, he's a polarising figure, with plenty of strong supporters, as well as plenty of staunch opponents. His political career has been dogged with criminal indictments, and last year he even survived being stabbed in the neck by a would-be assassin. But the key to understanding this presidential election is to know why it happened 2 years early in the first place. So we're going to briefly wind the clock back and recap the dramatic martial law debacle and subsequent turmoil. On the 3rd of December last year, late at night, then President Yoon Suk-yeol, citing obstructionism by the opposition-controlled National Assembly, imposed martial law, i.e. military rule, something that had not been done since South Korea's democratization. Enough lawmakers soon gathered at the National Assembly and voted to overturn the declaration. Among the chaotic scenes that night, Lee Jae-myung live-streamed himself climbing the fence to bypass troops and get into the Parliament building. The vote, coupled with growing protests, forced Yoon to back down, and after just 6 hours, he lifted martial law. He was later impeached by lawmakers, a move that was upheld months later by the Constitutional Court, which removed Yoon from office, triggering a snap presidential election that the main party suddenly had to contend with. For the centre-left opposition DPK, Lee Jae-myung, despite his various legal troubles, was really the only realistic choice, and he was comfortably selected as its candidate. However, the ruling Conservative PPP had a much trickier time choosing theirs, having been divided and damaged by the martial law saga. The PPP membership initially selected former Labour activist turned hardline Conservative politician Kim Moon-soo, but party leadership then sought to replace him with former Prime Minister and acting President Han Duck-soo instead, sparking tense infighting and legal challenges, which resulted in Kim being selected after all. Kim Moon-soo was a pretty controversial choice, not least for some past derogatory remarks, but notably he was perhaps the politician most openly opposed to removing Yoon from office post-martial law. Unsurprisingly then, this was a natural attack point for Lee, suggesting a Kim victory would mean a return of insurrectionists, while Kim in turn portrayed a Lee presidency as potentially dangerous and unchecked by the DPK-controlled parliament. Regardless, what does Lee Jae-myung's victory mean for South Korea? Well, it obviously does represent a leftward shift for the country, though it's worth pointing out that during this election campaign, Lee notably tried to rebrand from progressive populist to pragmatic centrist in order to appeal to crucial swing voters in the centre, and he omitted universal basic income, once his passion project, from his campaign promise. Lee has pledged that his top priorities will be to revive the struggling economy and focus on the cost of living for low and middle income families and small business owners. He's also proposed amending the constitution to reduce the presidential term from 5 to 4 years, and replacing the single term limit with a consecutive 2-term one. His other proposed reforms include a runoff system for presidential elections, and curbing presidential powers by restructuring the balance between president, prime minister, and National Assembly. Lee's purported shift to the centre can also be seen in his foreign policy position too. Having long taken a pretty critical view of the alliance with the US, cooperation with Japan, and calling for engagement with North Korea and China, during this election, Lee has pivoted to praising the US alliance as central to South Korea's foreign policy, and he's also said that he'll continue trilateral cooperation with Japan and the US, but still thinks dialogue with North Korea and China is important. Lee clearly recognises that one of his most pressing issues will be trying to protect South Korea's export-heavy economy from Donald Trump's trade wars, which the country has struggled to address due to its leadership vacuum over the past 6 months. Lee has notably already publicly praised Trump for his negotiation skills and noted that they both survived assassination attempts, so is clearly, at least initially, seeking to build a warm personal relationship with the US president. However, on both domestic and foreign policy issues, there's natural scepticism at home and abroad whether Lee's self-styled pragmatic centrist shift is a lasting phenomenon rather than just a campaign strategy that will dissolve once in office. Ultimately, one of Lee's biggest challenges will be to try and heal South Korea's deeply polarised politics, which is far easier said than done, especially when you consider that he wasn't propelled to the presidency because of widespread personal appeal. Lee has obviously massively capitalised on the public's anger at the PPP for Yoon's martial law attempt, and has benefited from the fact that the party nominated a Yoon defensive candidate, who suffered due to the relative strength of a third-party conservative candidate. So while South Korea's political drama has definitely calmed down, don't expect it to be smooth sailing for President Lee, particularly as his ongoing legal cases, which include alleged bribery and election law violations, could also complicate his presidency, as there's a debate over whether those trials will continue now he's taken office. If you want to know more about this topic, there's plenty of other outlets reporting about this online. Unfortunately, it's sometimes hard to tell exactly which way these outlets lean politically, making it difficult to understand exactly how your view of the world is being biased by the sources you're reading. That's where this week's sponsor, Ground News, comes in. Their website and app, developed by a former NASA engineer, allows us to pull back the curtain on media bias and have a look at exactly how each story has been covered. For instance, this story on misinformation during the South Korean election has been covered by more than 63 sources. We know that at least 9 of these have been reported by the left, and at least 10 of these have been reported by the right. That's not all though. Ground News has tons of genuinely useful features. Take their blind spot feed, for instance. This shows you stories underreported by one side of the political spectrum or the other. For example, if you lean right, you probably missed this story on how Asian shares and US stock indexes are rising amid easing trade tensions. Here at TLDR News, we think that Ground News is an incredibly useful tool for our current media landscape, one that's constantly trying to attract your attention and sway you towards or away from certain political viewpoints. Having a tool that helps you spot this and helps you take action really is a game changer. If you're interested in everything that Ground News has to offer, you can get 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage Plan subscription by using the link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen. This limited time offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.